It's Tuesday, so it's time for another top 10 video. Even though monster videos seem to do the worst as far as what you guys like, I'm doing another one, but to change it up a little bit, it's my top 10 monsters from Kobold Press's Tome of Beasts. This is a fantastic resource with 400 plus monsters in it, and they're pretty awesome, so if you want to see what my top 10 are, stay tuned. So once again, thanks to the folks at Kobold Press for sponsoring this video. Before we dive into the top 10, I did just want to direct your attention to the Tome of Beasts 2 Kickstarter, and I'll tell you a couple reasons why in just a sec. 1, 3 days left to go, probably 2 by the time you see this. Pledge goal, or backer goal for Kickstarter was 30,000. It's now 300,000 and counting. They've been blowing past stretch goals. You're going to get all sorts of cool stuff. I'd highly recommend, if you don't have them already, to get the layer books from Kobold Press. They're a great resource to come up with pre-made encounters, and also a good way to figure out how you're going to incorporate some of these new monsters into your campaign, while you could just set up a specific layer. I highly recommend them. I have all the other ones. They're really great. There's a whole bunch of different versions you could do. You could do digital tabletop versions, PDFs, and hardcovers, and limited editions. But look at these stretch goals. They're adding different kinds of monsters. They're adding ones that you and I, backers, can create for certain levels. They added new familiars. I don't know what this slug thing is, but I want it. Different monsters from different regions. 3 monsters of less than CR1 are added here, right? Total of 50 backer monsters. Creatures of Leng are next at 320, and then new elementals added at 340. So that's really cool. You still have time to back if you so choose, which would be really cool. It's 400 new monsters, just like Tome of Beast 1 was. Now, I'm going to go through my top 10 in just a bit, but I thought it would be interesting to just showcase a couple of the monsters they've announced thus far. We don't have stat blocks, we just have art and names. But one is the Carnivorous Sod, okay? This looks just like a piece of grass that has animated and eats you. It's like a snapping turtle made out of grass. I'm assuming that's a plant creature, might be elemental. I don't know. I think that could be fun to fight. What else do we have? This one, I love this one. This may be my favorite, calling it now. The Hoard Drake. So you're going to see something in this vein come a little bit later in the top 10 list. But this looks like it's a creature, like a dragon manifested of the Hoard, or a drake that hoarded so much stuff that it became part of it. I don't know. I'm very excited. We have the Swamp Naga. This looks like a more creepy looking Naga with some tentacles. No big deal there. The Otter Folk, which look cute, but I'm imagining they're probably pretty dangerous, and they have some sort of like Aboleth spear throwing type device here. Ogrepede. This thing is absolutely terrifying. This is like a human centipede style creature, but multiplied, and instead of humans, it's ogres. This is nightmare fuel. Like this is the kind of things children are told in D&D universes are not real because they're too scary to be real, and then someone has to fight one. And then lastly is the Timingula, a massive whale-eating creature. This looks like a crazy Leviathan thing. Looks awesome. I'm excited. Anyway, the rules for this top 10 video, again, there'll be a link in the description if you want to check out the Kickstarter. Rules for this top 10 video is it's got to be a monster in Tome of Beasts. That's it. Let's dive in. Number 10. Number 10 is the Sharkjaw skeleton. Honestly, just look at it. It is literally a humanoid skeleton comprised of shark jaws. I don't really need any other description beyond that. We can take a look at it. It's a challenge rating 1. It's nothing crazy, but like when you want to throw an undead type creature at an enemy, or at your players rather, and you don't want to just do like the zombie or the ghoul, have them fight a skeleton made of shark jaws. Maybe it's something to do with like a nautical themed adventure, or maybe they're visiting a coastal town and there's a bunch of like shark jaws around in like a building, and then they go in there and then they all like amalgam cartoon style into this massive skeletal creature, and then you have to fight it. And obviously, it's got a decent bite attack because it's literally made of shark jaws. But it doesn't do anything crazy, right? It's a challenge rating 1. It can grapple people, and it has claw attacks as well. And again, I am more curious who made this thing. So it has to see here. It says that it's an automaton. Someone made it with a purpose, so someone has to give it commands. So that could be a whole hook for a low-level campaign. Who's the person making Sharkjaw golems? Number 9. Number 9 is a map mimic, which at first glance you may just see the image and say, oh, it's a mimic that is a map or a piece of paper. But if you think about what a mimic can do in and of itself, a mimic can take the shape of anything. It could be a door, a bed, a treasure chest is the common thing. But what I like about this, probably more than the monster itself, is the lore, which may or may not be D&D lore true, but it is in the Kobold Press Midgard world in this book, and I'm adapting it in mine. So what's cool is it says that mimic adhesive actually contains thousands of tiny mimic larvae, and other mimic don't know that when they eat other things, they are internally cannibalizing their own offspring. And what happens is, like, if you get stuck with a mimic, right, some of that residue may stay on your body, and it survives, and it can kind of grow and become a mimic larval creature, sort of worm-like, and that is a map mimic. If that map mimic manages to survive for so long, then it will then gestate into a mimic that you and I know. But this kind of mimic is weaker, obviously, than its parent-type mimic. It can't mimic anything larger than a dinner plate. So something that's pretty common that it will like to do is a map or a scroll or some sort of parchment-like material. Now, they're only a challenge rating a quarter, so it's, again, probably low-level stuff. But what's interesting is it has a pseudopod, which doesn't really do too much damage, but if it's in object form, the target is subject to its constrict face ability, where basically it, like, globs itself onto your face. So you've got, like, a piece of paper on your face, and it covers your eyes, ears, and your airways, and you're immediately blinded and deafened and start suffocating. So I just think that this, again, not that you need to make your players paranoid, because they're D&D players, they're paranoid by nature, but this could be really fun and something they're unexpected. And again, just setting up that kind of lore, if you think about it that way, right? If a map mimic is a mimic larva that grows into a worm-like map mimic creature that eventually gestates into a regular mimic, well, what happens if a regular mimic continues to live on? Does it grow into some sort of significantly larger mimic that you may have to deal with further on in the campaign? Something to consider. Number 8. Number 8 is the Weeping Treant. So it's not inherently evil, though you may think it just by looking at it. It is a neutral plant-like creature. So this is sort of a more vicious guardian of a darker, spooky kind of forest. Whereas I think a standard Treant is more what we think of when we think of Ents, right? From like Tolkienian lore and Lord of the Rings, right? These are sort of like a darker version of that. Perhaps if one of the forests, like Fangorn Forest, was corrupted and dark, then this would be the kind of Ents that you would see there. But they look terrifying, and that was just, I like the idea of them. So they're challenge rating 6, which I believe is on par with a regular Treant, but they have a couple of different things, like these weeping tears, right? So trees do weep, right? Sap comes out of trees, and that's how we get things like amber. But their tears are highly acidic. So anyone who attacks the Treant from a range of 5 feet or less must make a dex save or take a d12 acid damage from splashed tears. The acidic matter continues, doing another d12 at the start of each of the creature's turn until it or an adjacent ally takes an action to wipe the tears off or 3 rounds go by. So part of the thing I will say you'll see in the course of a Kobold Press scenario is their monsters tend to be slightly more lethal than your base 5e monsters, and I'm actually very okay with that because I do find that my players don't have a hard time fighting most monsters contained in the player's handbook, or sorry, in the monster manual. So having monsters that are a little bit more difficult is a good challenge. And for me personally, with veteran players, new monsters that they don't know, that they can't look up on a book unless they have it, keeps them on their toes and makes them a little confused as to what they're fighting. So I don't know, it's just like a dark, spooky treant, and it's fun, and I like it. So it's my list. Here it is. Number 7. Number 7 is an empty cloak. I've mentioned in other monster-based videos that a cloaker is one of my favorite monsters. So why don't we take the cloaker a quite literal step further and make it an actual cloak creature that is a construct that fights. So this, again, is a low-level challenge rating 1/2 monster, but it is basically some sort of unobtrusive guardian created to, it says here, Shadow Fae nobles sometimes wear them, which is an even cooler concept. It has like Doctor Strange kind of vibes, right? Cloak of Levitation, could fly off and do things. Certain like spookier creatures could wear this cloak as a cloak and then choose to like disrobe from it, and then this gets the stat block of the construct that it is and goes off and fights. Again, it's nothing too crazy, right? They can wrap people up and have advantage on attack rolls if they're in the creature's same space. They can fight with a sword, because they do kind of have shadow appendages, the shadow slam. And they have the shadow snare ability. They can choose to hit somebody within 20 or 60 feet long and short range. And they're restrained. To escape, the restrained creature or an adjacent ally must use an action to make a strength check. And then it tells you what its snare hit points are in case you want to try to destroy it. So it's nothing crazy, but it is an interesting concept of like a cloak on a rack that literally animates and has like a smoky person type, like a humanoid shape to it, and can fight. And after, it can wield weapons, so you could potentially have them wielding a magical weapon, right? So it could do more damage. Again, I like the concept of someone wearing it and then it flying off of them and then joining the fight as a separate ally, or they go down and then it animates. Very cool stuff. I put one in one of my games, and I had the shadow snare be like a shadow possession jutsu from Naruto, and it went over very well with all of the players. They thought it was really cool. But yeah, it's, again, I know a lot of these are low level, but I think they're really cool and they're fun to incorporate really in any game, and you could obviously just adjust the stats to make them a little more suitable for higher level play. Number 6. So number 6 is really any of the drakes in this entire book, because they're all really cool. I really like the concept of the paper drake, which is kind of like a folded up piece of origami. But I'm going to go with the Alehouse drake as a specific one I talk about. So first of all, how cute is this thing? It's like a fat little drake creature. They love to hang out in bars. They're gossips. They're like, I don't know. It's just a cool thing. I think you could build like a really cool bar or tavern in your game could have one of these things in it. And that I could see the party wanting to go to a lot, to just talk to, play, scritch this drake, which does speak common, right? So it can talk. It states here that they observe a lot and they are relentless gossips, so it may be a way to get information out of people. And I like the concept here that it says the longest known living one was over 400 years old, and they can become beloved by innkeeping families and are treated a bit like family heirlooms. Again, it's a challenge rating 1/2. It does have some spell casting ability, which is kind of cool, and it has some decent spells, right? Both things that could be used maliciously, like Dissonant Whispers and Ray of Sickness, but also things like invisibility and calm emotions and things to help calm people down. It has forgetful spellcasting, which is if a target is affected by a mind-affecting spell from it, they have to make a wisdom save or forget the source of the spell, so you forget that this thing is casting. It has a bite attack, a claw attack. Its breath weapon is an intoxicating gas that poisons you. You become poisoned regardless, and then if you fail a con save, you're stunned. And it can discombobulate you. And again, this is one of those things where early on I feel like we were people that didn't fully understand the mechanics of 5th edition used terminology that we don't really use, right? So it says make a touch attack. Can make a touch attack that grants its target a +3 to dexterity skill checks and melee attacks, but also induces confusion as per the spell. lasts for 1d4 rounds, and you need to make a charisma save to negate it. We don't really do touch attacks, and we don't really do solid numbers added to things like dex +3 to melee attacks and dex-based skill checks. But obviously, you could treat it as it's written or tweak it and adjust it for more 5e suitable. But this thing is just cool, and like I said, I feel it'll make a memorable encounter for your players. Number 5. Number 5 is red hags. Right, so hags exist in D&D. There are 3 in the monster manual, and I know there was more added in Volos, and I think maybe in Mordenkainen's too. But there were a bunch added in the Tome of Beasts, and one that I thought was really interesting was this concept of the red hag. A sort of kind of beautiful hag in a way. I mean, obviously she's not, she's got massively clawed hands and sharp teeth and some kind of looks like scarring on her body, but more attractive than a typical hag, I guess. So that was kind of a concept. And this is the oldest hag, at least per this, right? Some of them to live in the thousands of years. So very, very powerful, very old. They're only a challenge rating 7, so not super powerful. But the lore is that they're very old, and I like this. Within their red hags often serve as druids. Within their druid circles, they practice blood sacrifice and perform ritualistic blood magic, both to slake their craving for humanoid blood, but also as a means to venerate Hecate, goddess of dark magic. Right, Hecate being a goddess in, I believe, Greek mythology. Red hags also favor the cleric and wizard classes. Few ever seek a martial path. The ancient hags all answer to a hierarchy. So what's cool is that gives you ideas. If you want to take this hag a few steps further to make them more powerful, you could give them class levels, which is then they give you the idea of what to do, right? An elder race, older than elves and as old as the dragons, they claim red hags are the most cunning and longest lived of the hags, having a lifespan of more than 1,000 years. So obviously hags have all sorts of interesting lore and things you could do, but now this could be an even more ancient hag, potentially having even more deep-seat power and things you could do in your game. Again, we've got innate spellcasting here, right, up to 4th level slots. Can breathe air and water, advantage on saving throws against spell effects, can sense the blood of living creatures, which is badass. Its claws do 3d8, so that's nothing to be, that's no minor ability. It's better than most cantrips, right? And then siphoning aura, it radiates an aura in a 30-foot radius for 3 rounds. It draws all fluids out through a creature's mouth, nose, eyes, ears, and pores. Every creature of the hag's choosing on that turn takes 18 necrotic damage or half damage with a successful Constitution saving throw. So regardless of some of the fact that it has more potentially dangerous spells in Call Lightning and Flame Blade and things like Dominate Beast, but the fact that you could physically describe to your players their bodily fluids and blood and moisture and whatever being sucked out through their pores is terrifying, and that could be an amazingly horror type gross out section. I don't know how everybody's games play, but that's a good way to shake your players if you need to kind of wake them up, or hey, focus up, your blood's being pulled out your pores or out your nose. That could be a pretty cool thing, and again, I just think it's badass. So I haven't put one in my games yet, but it's on the list. Number 4. Number 4 is the Hoard Golem. And honestly, it's the picture that sold me right out the gate. I don't need to tell you much more about this thing other than the fact that it is an animated treasure hoard that fights and tries to kill you. But what I really like is some of the lore here, that Hoard Golems are born from the paranoia of dragons. So, right, we see with the idea of beholders dream other beholders into existence. But despite their great physical and intellectual power, dragons are always suspicious of other creatures willing to work for them. The first Hoard Golem was created when a dragon realized that there could be no guardian more trustworthy within its hoard than its hoard itself. I mean, that's gold. I love that. That's amazing. You could deal into a whole long list of other cool things using that concept, but also, what's more terrifying to a group of players or potentially more devastating. Then they beat the dragon and start going through the dragon's hoard, which then animates and fights them after the fact. Like, that's crazy. It's challenge rating 12, so it's gonna be nasty. It's gonna be for a higher level dragon. Creatures within 120 feet of it must make a perception check. Can suffer disadvantage on perception checks because it's just so shiny they want to look at it. It's got advantage on saving throws against magic. Its attacks are magic. Its slam attack does 60-10 plus 6 damage with a 10-foot reach, and then it can do the thieving whirlwind. It transforms into a 20-foot radius whirlwind of treasure. In this form, it has immunity to all slashing and piercing damage. As a whirlwind, it can enter a creature's space and stop there. Every creature in the space the whirlwind occupies must make a DC 17 Dex save or take 6d10 plus 7 bludgeoning damage, and the whirlwind removes the most valuable visible item on the target, including wielded items, but not armor. If the saving throw is successful, the target takes half damage and retains all their possessions. It can remain in this form for 3 rounds, or it can transform back into its normal form on any of its turns as a bonus action. Plus, it's got immunity to poison, psychic, bludgeoning, piercing, slashing from non-magic that aren't adamantine, like a typical golem, and then immune to charm, exhausted, frightened, paralyzed, petrified, and poisoned. Again, what do players want more than anything? Treasure. What do they want more than treasure? Keeping the treasure they already have. And this thing hits all of the buttons and takes all of the things away. And again, not that you need to make them more paranoid, but this will absolutely do so. Number 3. Number 3 is the Lindwurm. First of all, it looks cool, right? It's got a cool, snaky, like, the color palette is great. It's challenge rating 5, so you could use it at lower levels. You could use a couple at higher levels. But honestly, this has a nostalgia for me because very, very early on in my D&D career, in both YouTube and streaming, the folks at Kobold Press reached out about playtesting stuff for them. And one of the monsters they sent me to playtest was the Lindwurm. I think this is probably around episode like 10, maybe 15 of my original homebrew D&D campaign, which is in all 53 episodes of its entirety here on this channel. And yeah, I playtested the Lindwurms, and it was just one of the very early on things that I used, and it's just stuck with me ever since. I've used it in campaigns since then because I like it so much. It's immune to cold damage, it's vulnerable to fire, so it can go down pretty easily. But one of the things that I like the best about it is this Lindwurm fever. A creature infected with this disease by a Lindwurm's bite gets a level of exhaustion an hour after being infected. They must make a con saving throw after each long rest. On a failure, they gain 1 level of exhaustion and recover no hit dice from the long rest. On a success, they recover 1 level of exhaustion and regains hit dice normally. If the infected creature reduces itself to 0 exhaustion by making successful saving throws, the disease is cured. So it has a really good persistence manner, and it can, severely cripple a group, especially if one person gets infected and people don't realize it. I don't know. I just really liked. I also like the idea of like diseases because they don't come up too often in 5e, so that's a cool thing. It can make 1 bite attack, 1 claw attack, and 1 constrict attack. Its bites are pretty solid, 2d8 plus 4, or if you contract the Lindwurm fever. The claws do 3d8 plus 4, and the constrict is a grapple and restrain constrict, so it can do a good job of locking down a party. I just really like them. I think they look badass, and that's why they're on my list. Number 2. So what is worse than an Aboleth? How about an undead Aboleth? And that's why number 2 is the Nihileth Aboleth, the first monster in the Tome of Beasts, and something that I have a deep personal connection with, as it was a large part of one of my characters in my current homebrew campaign's backstory. They just recently managed to defeat it, and I was very excited to have this thing thrown at them. So basically what it's going to do is have pretty much most of the stuff that you're used to with an Aboleth, but then added undead stuff on top of that. So it can go ethereal. It has resistances to all these different damage types. Some are only while in ethereal form, immunity to a ton more. Cold, necrotic, poison, bludgeoning, piercing, slashing from non-magic. immune to charm, exhausted, frightened, grappled, paralyzed, petrified, poisoned, prone, and restrained. So it says, unless otherwise noted, treat it as an Aboleth, but it's undead, so it doesn't need air, food, drink, or sleep. It has undead fortitude, so if it takes non-radiant damage, drops it to 0, it can make a save to come back to 1 instead. And then again, as it states here, it can go between the ethereal and the material plane. And then it can get different resistances depending on the plane it's in. It doesn't secrete a mucus cloud like a regular Aboleth. It has a void aura, which is any creature that starts its turn within 5 feet of it must make a con save or be slowed as per the spell. In addition, any creature that has been diseased by it or one of its zombies takes 2d6 cold damage every time it starts its turn in the aura. If a creature communicates telepathically with it or uses a psychic attack against it, it can spread its disease to the creature. Creature must make a DC 14 wisdom save or be infected with the same disease caused by its tentacle, which we'll talk about in a second. This ability replaces the probing telepathy ability of an Aboleth. So the tentacle here, right, it can become diseased. The disease has no effect for 1 minute, during which time it can be removed by lesser restoration or comparable magic. After 1 minute, the diseased creature's skin becomes translucent and slimy. The creature cannot regain hit points unless it is entirely underwater, and the disease can only be removed by heal or comparable magic. Unless the creature is fully submerged or frequently doused with water, it takes d12 acid damage every 10 minutes. If a creature dies while diseased, it rises in 1d6 rounds as a Nihilethic zombie, which we'll talk about briefly. The zombie is permanently dominated by the Nihileth, right? So it's got a void body. As a reaction, can reduce the damage from a single source to 0. As a bonus action, it can go between ethereal and back. And then it has its legendary actions, and then you have lair actions, which one of the coolest ones is it can make these Nihilithic creature from the Black Lagoon looking fish zombie creatures. But what's really neat is one of its lair action abilities is its void absorbance. So it can pull life force from any zombies it has, and it takes 66 hit points from zombies within 30 feet of it, spread evenly across them, and then heals it. So if it has an army of zombies and keeps making more zombies by killing other people, it can just choose to sap those as a living health battery, which makes it that much more deadly. It's pretty awesome. I love it. It's challenge rating, I think, 12? Yeah, so it'll be a decently powerful thing to throw at it could be a singular boss with a couple of minions. It could go a long way. Number 1. And lastly, number 1 is the Death Butterfly Swarm. I know it seems strange, but this, once again, has some nostalgia for me. This was the first monster that Kobold Press ever sent to me for playtesting, and was the first time I came dangerously close to my first ever TPK. The party all managed to survive, but this creature was what almost did them in. And we still talk about it to this day, how they were almost killed by butterflies. So I threw a greater death butterfly swarm here, which you can see is a swarm of tiny beasts. Hit points is decent, but it's a challenge rating 6, so it treats like a swarm, so vulnerable to cold and fire damage, but resistant to bludgeoning, piercing, and slashing from non-magical weapons. The party didn't have a lot of those at the time in my game. And you can see it has potent poison, which is butterfly swarm's poison effects, corporeal undead who are otherwise immune to poison, so that's not a huge deal. Swarm, it is a swarm creature, so it can occupy another creature's space and move through it. The swarm can't regain hit points or gain temporary hit points. And weight of wings is a creature in a space occupied by the death butterfly swarm has its speed reduced by half and must succeed for the greater on a DC 16 dexterity saving throw or become blinded. Both effects end when the creature doesn't share space with the swarm at the end of the creature's turn. If a creature succeeds on the saving throw, it's immune to the swarm's blindness, but not the speed reduction for 24 hours. And then it can make 2 bite attacks against every target in its space. It's huge size, the greater one, so it takes up a lot of spot on the map. +6 to hit, 6d6 plus 3 piercing damage, or 3d6 plus 3 piercing damage if it's at half or fewer hit points. The target also takes 5d6 poison damage and becomes poisoned for 1d4 rounds. A successful DC 15 con save reduces the poison damage by half and prevents the poison condition. So again, it's just, I mean, like, it just looks like a swarm of butterflies. They're not undead. They are a death butterfly swarm. So a death butterfly swarm results when a rare breed of carrion-eating butterflies drawn to the stench of great decay feeds on the corpse of a fiend, demon, or similar creature. Again, the lore behind everything you're going to get, and you do get this level of lore for just about every creature you're going to have in the Tome of Beasts. So it's just so good. And again, killing your players with butterflies, what could be more satisfying or possibly demeaning, depending on how you want to look at it. So again, that's my top 10 monsters from Kobold Press's Tome of Beasts. You can check in the description to go over to Kobold Press's website to pick up a copy of Tome of Beasts. It's available in both hardcover as well as the PDF like I showed you here. And again, there is a link in the description to Tome of Beasts 2 Kickstarter. That is out right now. It's got about 3 days left, maybe 2 days by the time you're actually watching this video. And again, they have a ton of other awesome products out there. If you want to check them out, you can go to their website, check out their blog. There's a lot of good stuff. They did a whole series where they've been like revisiting the Creature Codex, which is another monster supplement they released, and the Tome of Beasts to expand the creatures and add more cool lore and stuff around them. And they really do truly care deeply about all this stuff. So I highly recommend it. You can, I think, donate at certain levels to actually create your own monsters. If you've ever heard of the Swobold, the sort of big hulking kobold type creature that was released in the Creature Codex, that was actually designed by me myself, so that's pretty cool. Anyway, I hope you all enjoyed this video, and I will see you next time.